Now, other than its 2-episode premiere, The Acolyte has been failing, week in and week out, to crack into the Nielsen ratings for the top 10 original new shows on streaming. Which, no, obviously isn't very good for a show set in a premier franchise like Star Wars. One that is supposed to be, along with Marvel, a sort of flagship franchise for Disney+. It's supposed to be racking up the views and bringing in the subscribers and making Disney money. However, that hasn't been the case with The Acolyte, and its performance has been especially bad when you consider that of all the other live-action Star Wars shows to come out on Disney+, only Andor had 1 week, or 1 episode, where it failed to crack the top 10, that being its 9th episode, and it actually saw a fairly decent increase with its final 3 episodes, or so I'd guess, as word of mouth began to spread that it was a rather good show, and worth checking out, despite the name of it that I don't think did it any favors when it came to viewership. Anyway, though yes, Andor did fail to crack the top 10 once in its 12-episode run, and every other Star Wars show made it each and every week, The Acolyte hasn't made it since, again, that 2-episode premiere. That is, until the numbers for the finale dropped just yesterday, and it managed to once again sneak in and take the 10th spot with 335 million minutes of watch time, which might not sound too bad. That sounds like a lot of people were watching it until you compare it to, say, the final episode of Season 2 of The Mandalorian, which had 1,336,000,000 minutes of watch time, or roughly a billion more minutes of time watched than the Acolyte finale. You can even compare it to the aforementioned Andor, and see that for its finale, and yes, it had more episodes overall, but for its finale it managed 674 million minutes of watch time, compared again to that 335 million for The Acolyte. In fact, when we compare its finale, The Acolyte's finale, to every other finale for a live-action Star Wars series on Disney+, we see that it got absolutely demolished by all of them, that it's not even close really. And what I did here for the numbers you are now seeing on your screen is I divided the total number of watch minutes during a week, the week of its finale, by the runtime of the episode to get a very rough approximation of views or how many people actually watched the episode. It's just a kinda better way to directly compare them, considering some of the finales, of course, are longer episodes than others. Though it should also be noted that, yes, some of the shows, like The Mandalorian, have previous seasons as well. Previous seasons that people could technically be watching that week and adding to its watch time. Or, like with Andor, it has more episodes overall in the season, or perhaps it has less, like Kenobi and Book of Boba Fett did. In other words, no, this isn't an absolutely perfect comparison, but there is really no perfect way to do this, and it's probably about as fair as we can come up with, especially given the limited amount of data we have at our disposal to do this. Oh, and also we don't have the numbers from Nielsen for the first season of The Mandalorian, if you are wondering why it is not on this list. All that said, as you can see, every other show greatly outperformed The Acolyte's finale, and only Andor and Ahsoka didn't, at the very least, double it up in terms of views, though they both got pretty close. We also have Mando Season 3 that had more than 3 times the views, and Mando Season 2 with more than 4 times the views, which is just insane that 4 times as many people watched the final episode, the Luke episode, then watched the final episode of The Acolyte, or maybe it's not all that crazy or surprising, maybe it makes total sense. Either way, it's also worth noting, speaking of how these, again, they're not exactly perfect comparisons, but Nielsen measures a week from Monday to Sunday, and that Mando Season 2 finale was technically at a disadvantage against The Acolyte, considering it dropped on a Friday morning in the wee hours of the morning for us here in the USA, and The Acolyte dropped Tuesday night in prime time. In other words, Mando Season 2's finale had less time, less days to rack up 4 times the number of views. And what I think is particularly troubling about these numbers, if you are Disney and Lucasfilm that is that this was a show that featured the Jedi and to some degree the Sith. This had plenty of lightsaber action in it as well, which means it had all of the hallmarks of Star Wars. It had everything people think of when they think Star Wars and want to see when they want to see Star Wars, and yet people still didn't care to watch it. And to be fair and honest here, yeah, some of the lightsaber fights were pretty cool, really good even. And yet, again, despite that, there was no audience for it. Despite cool action, no one seemed to care. Which is partly because Star Wars hasn't exactly been consistently churning out quality content here in the Disney era, and many have checked out at some point along the way. And it's partly because, and I made a video on this, so I won't go too much into it again here, but it's becoming quite clear that special effects just aren't that special anymore. People take them for granted. People expect shows and movies to look good nowadays, and they're not the reason you're going to watch something unless they are so over-the-top amazing that they are truly something to behold in and of themselves, like in, say, an Avatar movie. Basically, quality-looking lightsaber fights and putting a bunch of cool action on screen isn't going to bring in the viewers. Nor are things like Jedi and Sith or Darth Plagueis poking his head out of a cave for a few seconds. The Star Wars name alone, all of the things, again, it is kind of famous for, aren't enough to make people want to tune into Star Wars anymore. They're not going to give this brand the benefit of the doubt anymore. Because it turns out you need substance to go along with the spectacle, or no one is going to watch. No one really cares about just watching lightsaber fights for the sake of watching lightsaber fights. Not a lot of people anyway. Which is what they were. They were just cool lightsaber fights with poorly written characters wielding the sabers. And I mean, if you want to just watch that, if you do just want to watch some lightsaber fights, there are plenty of really great ones here on YouTube you can check out. Or you can just watch some of the trailers for the Old Republic MMO in 5 minutes. They create more compelling stories and characters than this show did in 8 episodes. And the saddest part of all, again for Disney and Lucasfilm, is that they spent $180 million on the Acolyte. They spent that kind of money to not move the needle at all, or to move it backwards when we, again, look at these numbers and see less and less people watching all of the time. Somehow, the more Star Wars Disney puts out, the more fans they lose. Kind of ironic. And what's also kind of ironic, and speaking of what can be found here on YouTube, I had a recent comment asked me to check out a Plagueis fan film by Everest Productions, and so I did. And I was blown away by it. It was fantastic, and they didn't spend $180 million to make it. They basically took the Plagueis novel, one of my favorite Star Wars books of all time, and using a video game engine, I believe, not sure which one, they turned it into something akin to a movie or a series, considering this was just the first part, complete with voice actors, a score, and so on, and I'll include a link to it in the description below should you want to check it out, which I do recommend. And it's so sad and even frustrating, and I mean no disrespect at all to Everest Productions by saying this, quite the opposite really, but it's sad that a small group of people driven by passion can create something more enjoyable than a mega corporation can with $180 million. I mean, I can feel the love for Star Wars in what they created, while I can feel the contempt for it in what Headland made. I can only feel her disdain for the Jedi and her desire to tell her story with Star Wars, rather than create something that is truly great for Star Wars. But anyway, going back to the numbers again quickly, from them we can see why an Acolyte Season 2 is never going to happen. Sorry all of you begging for it on social media, but there is no way they are pouring more money into this sinking ship. And we can also see why The Mandalorian is getting a movie. That show, those characters, Mando and Grogu, they are the only two truly successful things that have been created in the Disney era. And I do mean created since they are indeed original characters. And that is not to say there hasn't been other good Star Wars under Disney. There really has, but nothing that has had anywhere near the impact of those two characters. Well, not a positive one anyway. Certainly some of the Acolyte characters also have made an impact on Star Wars, on how fans feel about the franchise, but again, not in the way they were no doubt hoping for when they spent $180 million on this show. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about all this. What do you think about the Acolyte's numbers? Are you surprised with just how bad they were, or maybe you're not? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.